It started as just another night in Moscow, Idaho, a quiet college town nestled in the rolling hills of the Pacific Northwest. 4 college students slaughtered in the dead of night. No forced entry, no witnesses, no obvious suspects. The case had all the makings of a perfect crime until the killer made one crucial mistake. A single drop of DNA, a white Hyundai Elantra, a criminology PhD student who studied murder and then became the prime suspect. What really happened on that November night? And how did police track down the man they say is responsible? Stay with me, because this case is unlike anything you've heard before. At 1122 King Road, 6 students were home. Some had spent the night out at parties, others had stayed in. They laughed, they made plans, they scrolled through their phones one last time before bed. Just another weekend, or so it seemed. Somewhere in the distance a car engine idled, a lone figure moved through the night, watching, waiting, a mind already set on what was to come. The house was quiet now, the town asleep, and as the last lights flickered out, no one inside knew. They had just hours left to live. The next morning, nothing made sense. A frantic 911 call just before noon, a request for help, an unconscious person. But when officers arrived, what they found inside was something different, something unimaginable. Blood pooled across floors, streaked down walls. 4 young students stabbed to death in the early morning hours. No forced entry, no apparent struggle, just silence. A house frozen in time but marked with violence. The officers stood in the doorway, taking in the horror before them, the sheer brutality, the methodical nature of it. They knew immediately. This was no random act, but who and why? The victims, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogen, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, had no known enemies, no history of violence. They were friends, roommates, a couple. They had futures waiting for them. And yet, in the middle of the night, someone had walked into their home, moved from room to room, and taken their lives, before slipping away undetected. Word spread fast. Something terrible had happened on King Road. Students whispered about it in hushed voices. Parents called their children, begging them to leave town. The University of Idaho campus, usually alive with movement, laughter, and energy, fell silent. A killer was out there, somewhere, and no one knew who they were. Fear settled over Moscow like a heavy weight. Locked doors, empty classrooms, panic running through every conversation, because there was one question no one could answer. Was the killer finished? Speculation exploded online. Theories flooded social media. Was it personal? Was it a crime of passion? Was there a connection no one had uncovered? And if this was a targeted attack, had the killer done this before? Days passed, then weeks, and still no arrest. The town grew restless. Families demanded answers. But what the public didn't know, what even law enforcement was struggling to piece together, was that somewhere in the middle of this chaos, a single mistake had already been made. A clue left behind, overlooked at first, small but damning. It wouldn't be until December 30th, more than 6 weeks after the killings, that the name Bryan Kohberger would finally be spoken out loud. Who was he? Why did he do it? And how did investigators track him down? This is the true story of the Idaho student murders. Moscow, Idaho. Population, just over 25,000. A quiet, unassuming town. The kind of place where crime meant a stolen bike or a noise complaint from a college party that ran too late. A town where students felt safe walking home at night. Where the university was the heart of everything. Where nothing bad ever really happened. Until that night, no one in Moscow knew it yet, but by sunrise, everything would be different. Kaylee Goncalves was about to start the rest of her life. She had recently graduated, earned her degree, and had just landed a job in Austin, Texas. A new city, a new future. She had big plans. She always did. She was the one with the wild ideas, the one who made things happen. Smart, independent, driven. Her family described her as the kind of person who lit up every room she walked into. That night, she had come back to Moscow one last time to see her best friend Madison, to celebrate, to say goodbye before taking her next big step. She had no idea that step would never come. Madison Mogen and Kaylee had been best friends since they were little kids. They did everything together, birthdays, vacations, first jobs, first heartbreaks. If you saw one, you saw the other. Madison was kind, thoughtful, the type of friend who always knew the right thing to say. the one who would show up at your door, ice cream in hand if you had a bad day. She was studying marketing, balancing her coursework with a part-time job at a local restaurant. That night, she wasn't just spending time with Kaylee, she was celebrating their friendship, laughing, reminiscing, thinking about the future. She didn't know that night would be their last. Xana Kernodle was fierce, funny, and full of energy. She had a sharp sense of humor, the kind of wit that made people gravitate toward her. She worked at a restaurant, studied marketing, and had been dating Ethan Chapin for over a year. Ethan was different from the others. He wasn't just a student at the University of Idaho, he was a triplet, one of 3 siblings, all attending the same school. He was tall, athletic, always smiling. Everyone who knew him said the same thing. He had a heart of gold, the kind of person who made people feel safe. They had spent the evening at Ethan's fraternity, just a normal Saturday night. By 1:45 a.m., they were home, settling in for the night, completely unaware that a stranger was already nearby, watching, waiting. 1122 King Road was more than a house. It was a landmark in the University of Idaho student community. A 3-story rental, 6 bedrooms, sitting at the edge of a quiet neighborhood. It was known as a party house, the kind of place where music pulsed through the walls on the weekends, where students came and went at all hours. But to the 6 people who lived there, it was home. That night, the house was full. On the first floor, 2 roommates, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funky. By some stroke of fate, they would survive the night. On the second floor, Xana and Ethan, asleep in Xana's room. On the third floor, Kaylee and Madison, curled up together in bed just as they had done for years. Outside, the world was quiet. Inside, 4 young people lay sleeping, unaware that just across town, someone else was awake. 1:41 a.m. Kaylee and Madison stop at a popular food truck after leaving the Corner Club, a bar they frequented. They talk, they laugh. It's just another night. A man in a hoodie lingers in the background, watching. A friend offers them a ride home. They decline. They call an Uber instead. 2 a.m. Xana and Ethan return home from the fraternity party. The house is full, yet calm. No sign of what's coming. 2:52 a.m. Kaylee calls her ex-boyfriend Jack. No answer. She calls again, then again, 7 times in total, but nothing seems urgent. Just a girl trying to get in touch with someone she once loved. 3:12 a.m. The last known activity from Xana's phone. A DoorDash order arrives. A final notification before everything goes silent. 3:29 a.m. A white Hyundai Elantra is captured on surveillance footage, circling the neighborhood, driving past the house once, twice, 3 times. 3:45 a.m. The car disappears from view. The house is silent. Everyone inside is asleep. And then, at some point between 4 and 4:20 a.m., he enters. In one of the bedrooms, Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin are asleep. They're breathing slow and steady, their bodies unaware of the presence standing just beyond the threshold. The killer pushes the door open, stepping inside without a sound, his grip tightening around the handle of the knife he has brought with him. Ethan is the first to wake. Something in his subconscious stirs him, pulling him from the depths of sleep, a sensation of unease prickling at the edges of his awareness. Before he can fully comprehend what is happening, before his eyes can adjust to the darkness, the blade is already slicing through the air, striking with precision, burying itself deep. The impact is sudden, violent, and unrelenting. There is no time to react, no time to struggle. His body tenses for only a moment before collapsing, his breath stolen in an instant. But Xana is not asleep. She had been awake just moments before, scrolling through her phone, perhaps listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator or the distant sounds of the night. When she hears the commotion, her instincts scream at her to move, to run, to escape the unseen horror unfolding just feet away. Adrenaline surges through her veins as she tries to push herself from the bed, but the figure is already closing the distance between them. She fights, hard, scratching, clawing, pushing back against the force that is overpowering her. Her hands bear the marks of her resistance, deep defensive wounds where she has tried to grab the blade, tried to stop it from reaching her, but it is futile. The struggle is brief, but it is brutal. She stumbles toward the hallway, her fingers curling around the frame of the doorway, her body desperate to flee. But she never makes it. The knife finds its mark. She collapses. Blood pools at her feet. The house is silent once more. The killer does not stop. He moves with practiced ease, stepping over the lifeless bodies, his heart rate steady, his breath controlled. He knows what comes next, knows the path he must take. He ascends the stairs to the third floor, where two more victims sleep, unaware that their final moments are approaching. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogan are curled up together in the same bed, best friends who have spent nearly every moment of their lives side by side. Their laughter had filled this house just hours earlier. Their voices had echoed through the rooms, their plans for the future spoken aloud with excitement and certainty. They had been safe here, in this room, in this house they had called home. But safety is an illusion. The first attack is swift and efficient. The blade meets its mark with terrifying accuracy, cutting through the fragile boundary between life and death in mere seconds. Madison barely stirs before the darkness overtakes her, before the warmth of the bed is replaced by something far colder. Kaylee wakes. Perhaps she hears the shift in the air, the unnatural silence that follows, the presence that lingers too close. Perhaps she reaches out in the darkness, searching for her best friend, unaware that she is already gone. And then the pain comes. But something is different. Kaylee's wounds are deeper, more aggressive, more personal. Why? Why did the killer hesitate with Madison but unleash his full rage upon Kaylee? Was she the target all along? Was this more than just a random act of violence? There is no answer, only silence. On the first floor, Dylan Mortensen stirs, a noise, a sound just beyond her door. The distant thud of movement, the whisper of something shifting in the night. She is groggy, still caught between the fog of sleep and the growing unease settling in her chest. She listens, straining to make sense of the muffled sounds above her. Then she hears a voice, a man's voice, low, unhurried. "It's okay, I'm gonna help you." Her breath catches. The words are strange, unnatural, spoken in a tone that does not belong in this moment. She hesitates, fingers tightening around the edge of her blanket, debating whether to move, whether to check, whether to push open the door and step into the unknown. She does, and she sees him. A figure, tall, masked, dressed entirely in black. He does not lunge, does not run, does not panic. He walks past her, moving toward the back of the house, toward the open sliding glass door that he had entered through. And then, just as quietly as he arrived, he disappears. Dylan stands frozen. The house is silent. She does not know. She does not know what has happened just beyond her door. She does not know that 4 of her friends are gone. And she does not know that their killer has just walked past her, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror. A white Hyundai Elantra speeds away from the neighborhood. The driver is alone. His mission is complete. Inside 1122 King Road, the house is silent. 4 bodies lay undiscovered. 2 roommates remain alive, and no one will know until morning. The next morning, a surviving roommate finds something off. A door slightly open, a glimpse of something horrifying. She faints. Friends are called before 911. No one understands what they are walking into. When police arrive, they expect to find a student who drank too much, someone unconscious. Instead, they step into a nightmare. Blood seeps through the walls, stains cover the floor. The crime is so brutal that even seasoned investigators are shaken. No forced entry, no sign of the murder weapon, no clear suspect. But there is one clue. A car, a white Hyundai Elantra, and the name attached to that car is Bryan Kohberger. Sunday morning in Moscow, Idaho, unfolds like any other in this quiet college town. The air is crisp with the lingering chill of November, and the golden leaves that still cling to the trees rustle gently in the morning breeze. Students slowly emerge from their dorm rooms, bleary-eyed from a night of parties, while the more studious among them settle into coffee shops, nursing warm drinks and catching up on assignments. It is a peaceful, slow-moving morning. No one has any reason to believe that something unspeakable has happened just a few blocks away. But inside the off-campus house at 1122 King Road, the scene is completely different. There is no movement, no sound, no laughter echoing through the halls as it so often does in this known party house. Instead, there is a stillness, one that is unnatural, heavy, suffocating. The sun rises higher in the sky, but no one stirs. The hours tick by, and the house remains eerily quiet, oblivious to the rest of the town coming to life. It isn't until 11:58 a.m. that the silence is finally broken. A 911 call is placed from a cell phone inside the home. The voice on the other end is distraught, panicked, but confused. The caller tells the dispatcher that there is an unconscious person inside the residence. There is no mention of blood, no mention of a break-in, no indication that anything violent has occurred. The call is vague, so much so that it doesn't immediately raise alarm bells. Police and paramedics are dispatched to the address, expecting to find something minor, a possible alcohol-related incident, maybe a student who had passed out after a long night of partying. They have no idea what they are walking into. When first responders arrive, they are met outside by some of the surviving roommates and a few other individuals who have gathered near the house, unaware of the nightmare that lies just beyond the front door. The scene still appears normal. From the outside, nothing seems amiss. There is no sign of forced entry, no broken windows, no obvious indications that anything horrific has taken place. But the moment the first officer steps inside, everything changes. The air inside the house is thick, heavy, with a coppery, metallic scent that instantly makes the hair on the back of their necks stand up. It is a smell that law enforcement officers recognize immediately, the distinct, unmistakable stench of blood. And then they see it. Blood is everywhere. It is smeared on the walls, pooled onto the floors, soaked into the bedding. It has seeped so deeply into the wooden planks that it has begun to drip through the floorboards, staining the ceiling of the lower level. The sheer amount of it is staggering, the kind of scene that speaks of a frenzied, merciless attack. And then, one by one, the officers find the bodies. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogan, best friends since childhood, are discovered together in one of the upstairs bedrooms. They are brutally stabbed, their wounds so deep and violent that it is clear they never had a chance to fight back. Their final moments must have been swift, horrific, but swift. On the second floor, Xana Kernodle is found in another bedroom, but unlike Kaylee and Madison, she appears to have fought. There are defensive wounds on her hands, deep gashes where she tried desperately to fend off her attacker. She must have been awake when the killer came for her. She must have seen him, must have struggled, must have known in those final moments that she was about to die. And beside her, in the same room, is Ethan Chapin. He too has been stabbed repeatedly, though it is unclear whether he was attacked first or if he awoke in time to try and protect Xana. Either way, whatever happened in that room was violent. The brutality is unimaginable. This is not the work of someone who simply wanted to kill. This is the work of someone who wanted to destroy. As the investigators process the scene, one crucial piece of evidence stands out among the carnage. Near Madison Mogan's body, on the bed, partially tucked under the blood-stained comforter, is a single, chilling object, a knife sheath. It is not just any knife sheath. It is military grade, belonging to a Kabar combat knife, the kind issued to Marines and Special Forces. It is designed for silent, lethal attacks, built for maximum damage with minimal resistance. And on the leather surface of that sheath, the investigators find something even more damning, a single male DNA sample. Whoever did this, he made a mistake. He was careful, deliberate, methodical, but in the frenzy of the attack, he left behind a piece of himself. And that single trace of DNA will be the key to unraveling the mystery of who is responsible for the worst crime Moscow, Idaho has ever seen. As news of the murders begins to spread, panic grips the small town in a way it never has before. Moscow, Idaho, has always been a safe place. It is the kind of town where people don't lock their doors at night, where students feel comfortable walking alone after dark, where violent crime is almost unheard of. But now, everything has changed. For days, there is no suspect, no motive, no explanation for why 4 young students were butchered in their own home. The fear is immediate and overwhelming. Students begin fleeing campus, their parents demanding they come home, unwilling to risk their children's lives in a town where a killer is still out there, somewhere, hiding in plain sight. Theories begin to swirl, both in the town and online. Some believe the attack must have been personal, that the killer knew his victims. The brutality suggests rage, suggests that this was not a random act of violence, but something much deeper. Others fear the opposite, that this was a thrill kill, a random slaughter by a predator who might strike again. The university issues a statement urging students to remain vigilant, but offers no answers, no reassurances, no sense of safety. The streets are suddenly deserted after dark, the usual sounds of laughter and music replaced by an eerie silence. No one knows who to trust. But behind the scenes, law enforcement is already moving. The DNA on the knife sheath is a lead, and investigators are about to uncover something that will shake this case wide open. Because the man who committed this crime, the man who thought he was too smart to get caught, has made one fatal mistake, and soon the entire world will know his name. For weeks, the town of Moscow, Idaho, lived in fear. The brutal killings of 4 college students, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, sent shockwaves across the country. Who could have done this, and why? With no suspect in sight, investigators faced mounting pressure. The crime scene inside the off-campus house on King Road was horrific. Blood-stained walls, signs of a struggle, and an overwhelming sense of terror. But hidden within that chaos was a single mistake left behind by the killer. A knife sheath, partially tucked under one of the victims. It wasn't just any knife sheath. It was for a Ka-Bar combat knife, a brutal weapon often used by military personnel. Investigators immediately sent the sheath to the lab, hoping for even the slightest forensic lead. What they found changed everything. On the button snap of the sheath, forensic scientists discovered a single male DNA sample. It didn't belong to any of the victims. It was from an unknown person. But in today's world, DNA alone isn't enough. It needed to be matched. Instead of running the DNA through traditional criminal databases, investigators took a modern approach, using genetic genealogy. They uploaded the sample to a genealogical database, searching for partial matches. Slowly, they started building a family tree, working backward through distant relatives until they pinpointed a specific bloodline. One name stood out: Bryan Kohberger. He wasn't in the system. He had no prior criminal record, but the DNA suggested a direct connection. Now law enforcement needed more evidence. The name meant nothing at first, but as investigators dug deeper, an eerie profile emerged. Bryan Kohberger, 28 years old, a PhD student at Washington State University, just a short drive from Moscow, Idaho. His field of study? Criminology. He wasn't just a casual student. He was obsessed. Kohberger had spent years researching criminals, their minds, their motives. Some former classmates recalled his unsettling fascination with serial killers and police investigations. Even more disturbing were his social interactions. Many described him as intelligent but socially awkward, often making inappropriate or creepy comments about crime and forensic techniques. And then came the most chilling revelation. Kohberger had once conducted a survey asking criminals about their decision-making process. It was as if he had been studying crime not just as a scholar, but as someone preparing to commit the perfect murder. While forensic experts worked to confirm the DNA match, investigators were closing in from another angle. Surveillance footage from the night of the murders had captured a white Hyundai Elantra circling the crime scene multiple times before speeding away. It wasn't a coincidence. When detectives ran vehicle records, they made a stunning discovery: a white Hyundai Elantra registered to Bryan Kohberger. But the evidence didn't stop there. Investigators obtained cell phone records and found something even more disturbing. Kohberger's phone had pinged near the victim's house at least 12 times in the weeks leading up to the murders. He hadn't just driven past randomly. He had been stalking them, watching, studying their movements. Kohberger's careful planning had made him think he was invisible, but he had underestimated one thing: technology. By December 2022, law enforcement was confident Bryan Kohberger was their suspect. But they had to catch him before he disappeared. Unbeknownst to him, the FBI was already watching. When Kohberger left Washington for his parents' home in Pennsylvania, agents followed. Every mile, every gas stop, every overnight stay, he was never alone. In the early hours of December 30th, 2022, a team of FBI agents, state police, and SWAT officers moved in. They surrounded the Kohberger family home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania. With a search warrant in hand, officers stormed inside. Kohberger, awakened by the commotion, stood in stunned silence as agents surrounded him. He didn't run. He didn't fight. As they handcuffed him, one question lingered in the air. Had he seen this moment coming? He had spent years studying criminals, their mistakes, their capture. Now he was living it. But for the families of the victims, justice was only beginning. It has been months since the unthinkable happened, yet the wounds left by that night have not healed. The town of Moscow, Idaho, still carries the weight of what occurred in the early hours of November 13th, 2022, when four young, promising college students, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin, were violently taken from their families, their futures erased in an instant. But while grief lingers over the small town, while their loved ones struggle to reconcile their pain with the brutal reality of what transpired, another story is unfolding, a legal battle that will determine the fate of the man accused of these unimaginable crimes. The prosecution believes the evidence is undeniable: a series of digital breadcrumbs, a physical link found at the crime scene, and an unsettling history of alleged stalking all point in one direction. They are convinced that Bryan Kohberger, a criminology PhD student with an obsessive interest in criminal behavior, is responsible for what has been described as one of the most chilling multiple homicides in recent history. But in the courtroom, evidence must not just exist, it must be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And that is precisely what Kohberger's defense team is determined to challenge. Because despite the horror, despite the brutality, despite the overwhelming weight of the circumstantial and forensic evidence, he has pleaded not guilty. And if his legal team has their way, the jury may begin to question whether law enforcement truly has the right man. But that was just the beginning. For prosecutors, the answer is clear. This was not an impulsive crime. It was not an accident. It was a deliberate act carried out by a man who believed he could execute the perfect crime and walk away unnoticed. But in a courtroom, evidence, no matter how compelling, can be questioned, reframed, and cast into doubt. And Kohberger's defense team is preparing to do just that. Their argument is simple. There is no direct proof. Despite the extensive investigation, there is no security footage placing Kohberger inside the house. There is no murder weapon. There is no eyewitness who saw him commit the crime. And without these critical elements, the defense will argue that the case against him is built on assumptions rather than irrefutable facts. The knife sheath? They will suggest that DNA transfer is a possibility, that just because Kohberger's DNA was found on the sheath does not mean he was the person who left it at the crime scene. The car? They will argue that white Hyundai Elantras are common, and that simply owning one does not prove guilt. The cell phone pings. They will suggest that cell towers are imprecise, that while Kohberger's phone was in the general area, that does not mean he was inside the house, and certainly does not prove he was the one who carried out the attack. And then there is Kohberger himself. He has remained silent, he has not confessed, he has not broken under pressure. But does that indicate innocence? Or is it the behavior of a man who believes that, despite all the evidence, he is still smart enough to outmaneuver the law? Bryan Kohberger is not the typical criminal. He is not a man with a long history of violence, not a career offender with a track record of reckless behavior. Instead, he is a scholar, a PhD student dedicated to understanding the psychology of criminals, a man whose very field of study revolved around the question of how individuals commit heinous acts, and more importantly, how they evade capture. Could it be that, in the end, his greatest downfall was his own arrogance? Did he view this crime as an intellectual exercise, a test of his own intelligence against the system he spent years studying? Or was it something far more personal? A vendetta? A fixation? If the prosecution can answer that question, it could be the final nail in his coffin. But even as the trial approaches, even as the case builds against him, there are still lingering mysteries, questions that haunt the minds of investigators, legal experts, and the public alike. Why did he leave two roommates alive? Was it an oversight, or was it deliberate? Had he done this before? And if he is acquitted, could he do it again? The courtroom battle will be long, drawn out, and relentless. The prosecution will lay out every piece of evidence, constructing a methodical, damning case. The defense will push back at every turn, exploiting every potential weakness, planting seeds of doubt wherever possible. And then, when all is said and done, 12 jurors will decide his fate. Will Bryan Kohberger spend the rest of his life behind bars? Or will he walk free? For the families of Kaylee, Madison, Xana, and Ethan, The wait for justice continues. And for the town of Moscow, Idaho, the nightmare is far from over. He studied crime. He analyzed killers. He thought he could commit the perfect murder. But one tiny mistake, a single drop of DNA, brought everything crashing down. This is the story of how a criminology PhD student became the prime suspect in one of the most chilling mass murders in recent history. And trust me, this case is far from over. If you love gripping true crime stories, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a case to continue to be told. Thank you for watching, and stay safe.